In this session, we are going to go through a sample problem of creating the program that will, first of all, read two integers from keyboard, and the second, compare the two integers. If the first one is smaller than the second one, exchange the value. And the three, print out these two integers. So let's go back to the programming process. We need to clearly define what that program is to do, which we already state. Input, exchange values if the first one is smaller, and then output values. Then the second one is visualize the program running on the computer. Again, if you are working in a graphical user interface environment, usually you will have someone who design the interface for you and design the interface, design the interactions with users. For simple programs like ours, it will always be standard in from keyboard and standard out, print out to monitor and console. Then the third step is to use design tools to create a model of the program, and the fourth step is check the model for logical errors. So let's start first here. And as we discussed before, you should always divide your program into 3 sessions. Right? Input, calculation, and output. Then, so you need to read 2 integers from keyboard. If you want to divide further, you can also do read integer 1 from keyboard and integer 2 from keyboard. This will be 2 steps that separating them out. Similarly, you can do output. Print out integer 1 and print out integer 2. Now, in the calculation side, we will do a compare these 2 integers. If the first one is smaller than the second one, then exchange the value. Now, this exchange value is a part of the if statement. That's why we need to have an indentation here. Exchange the value. Only when this condition meets, we will do this. It's easier to write the first one and the third one, input and output. But then we also know how to do this comparison. First one, smaller. If smaller, that means if integer 1 smaller than integer 2, right? Then how do you exchange the value? In order to explain the calculation here, involved here, I will draw some pictures, some graphs here. So let's say this is the memory stack again. And we already know memory stack means you are having a series of memory space where your variables reside. Let's say our integer 1, I put I1 here, is here, and I2, integer 2 is here. And supposedly I1 is 25 and I2 is 10. How do I exchange the value here? If I put directly like I1 equals to I2 followed by I2 equals to I1, what will happen? If you put I1 equals to I2 first, what's going to happen is Java will take this I2 value and move it above to I1. So now I1 is 10. Oops. I should make a copy, not exactly move. So now I1 becomes 10 again. Then the next step, I2 equals to I1, we will make a copy of this 10 and copy it back. So the end result becomes, both becomes 10. Because when you have I1 equals to I2, there will be, the value inside I1 is overwritten. In order to avoid this issue, you need to have the original 25 stored somewhere. So let me put 25 back. You need to create a temporary variable. Let's just say it's called t, right? And remove this. Here we are going to put t equals to I1 first, so that I1's data is stored in t. So now t is 25. Then you will do I1 equals to I2. This will copy I2 here to I1. And finally, because I2 needs to change and the original I1 value is already stored in t, we will have I2 equals to t. So we will copy this over and paste to store that in I2. Thus, we finished exchanging the value, and t as a temporary variable can be discarded. You don't need to worry about this. Once your code finish, Java virtual machine will remove this from the memory. All right. So this is the way how we do variable exchange. You need to use a temporary variable to store the first variable's value. Then let the first variable have the second variable's value, and the second variable will fetch the first variable's original value from the temporary variable. Okay. So here we will say temporary integer equals to integer 1. Then integer 1 equals to integer 2. And eventually integer 2 equals to temporary integer. So this is a pseudocode we use to create the logic. Now, once we finish this pseudocode, we will enter the code and compile it. Then we will correct errors during compilation and correct the runtime error. So let me bring up Eclipse. Choose the default workspace. Eclipse is loading in the background. Now it's up and running. Let's close the welcome window and bring up my project. I have created a session 2 package. I'm going to create a new class inside this package. So let's call it sample question exchange variable and finish. You should form the habit as soon as you start writing, as soon as you create a skeleton class, you need to type in public static void main string array args. We will cover this string array args in almost the end of our class. For now, you don't need to worry about it. And you can see that the Eclipse by default put the curly brace after. You will see people using this convention that put the curly brace after beginning of the block. Or like our textbook, you put it down here. Either way is fine. Java will ignore this new line space anyway. So it's personal, as a matter of personal preference. For me, when I teach, because the textbook used this convention, so when I teach, I always use this convention. But at work, personally, I always put this up. It's just a leftover from my C style programming. Okay, so now let's copy the pseudocode and paste it here. And you can clearly see there's an error, but let's put everything inside. We have the input defined. So we will first define the scanner. And we have an input, read the first integer. And then we will read, read the second integer, right? And don't forget to add a blank space, a blank line between different data blocks. And then we also copy the printout session. So I'm printing out, says first integer, which is integer 1. And of course, we copy this over. Second integer. Okay, so we have the input, we have the output. By now, this should look familiar to you. And as you write more programs, at the end of this course, I expect you to write without copy and paste. And let's add the if statement. And this if statement, we will have a parenthesis. Don't forget to have a parenthesis around the Boolean expression. And we'll have code block. Code block goes into if statement. And here, this temp integer needs to be defined. All right, so this looks perfect now. This is how we write the program. And I think I also forgot to add a Java doc comment. Sorry about that. And you can write whatever you need to write. Like for example, I'll just copy something and add space here. Sample question to exchange variable values. And I'll show entry point of. Okay, now let's run the program. And you can see that I made a mistake. It's not actually not a mistake, but right now, what we are actually here, keyboard input in internet next int is waiting for me to input a value, but without any user interface, without any prompt asking me to input. I can still input. So that's the first one I entered is integer 1 is 23, and if I put 24, this will be the second integer, right? And now we successfully exchange the value and print out. But still, it will be a good practice if you can do a print first here, because you want to enter first integer, right? But now you also want to use a print instead of print line. What's the reason? I'll leave it to you to think, why do we use print here instead of a print line? Okay, now let's run this. Now we have a prompt, right? Let's say it is 12 and 4. And you can see that because first integer is larger than the second one, so this code block is never executed. All right,